I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy.
You can find previous podcasts and more information on a range of health topics at peoplespharmacy.com. If you have to make a decision about your health, how do you weigh the benefits and the risks? It's harder than you think. This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
The COVID pandemic has led to a lot of controversy about medical matters. As a result, many of us have trouble trying to figure out where to get information we can trust. If we don't feel that we're well informed about a treatment, we may hesitate to try it.
To practice shared decision-making well, you'll have to understand the difference between relative and absolute risk.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, learn what you can do to make better choices about your health.
In the People's Pharmacy health headlines, the United States Preventive Services Task Force has just issued draft recommendations for the use of aspirin to prevent heart attacks, strokes, and colorectal cancer. Previous recommendations from the task force suggested that people at fairly high risk for cardiovascular disease between ages 50 and 59 might benefit. The updated recommendations extend the age range of those who should discuss this option with their healthcare providers. People between 40 and 59 whose 10-year cardiovascular disease risk is at least 10% are encouraged to consider aspirin on an individual basis. The panel warns that older people may be at increased risk for bleeding and should not start low-dose aspirin as a preventive. The task force is trying to target primary prevention to people most likely to benefit and least likely to experience harm. People taking aspirin following a heart attack or on their doctor's recommendation are not advised to stop without consulting the physician. The panel points out that for people without cardiovascular disease, low-dose aspirin reduces the chance of a heart attack and stroke, but also increases the possibility of GI and other bleeding complications.
The Food and Drug Administration is urging food companies to cut back on the amount of salt they put in processed foods. The average American takes in about 3,400 milligrams of sodium a day, mostly from the salt that's added to commercially prepared foods. The FDA is hoping that companies will be able to reduce sodium in their foods so that Americans can get about 3,000 milligrams a day, a 12% reduction. The hope is that this modest salt reduction would have health benefits, especially for people at risk for high blood pressure. The American Heart Association recommends limiting sodium intake to half that amount, 1,500 milligrams daily. Not all researchers are convinced that such an aggressive goal is practical or really beneficial. A study in The Lancet a few years ago recruited 95,000 volunteers from 18 countries. These subjects were followed for about 8 years. Those who got moderate amounts of salt from their diet, about 3 to 5 grams of sodium daily, had slightly lower blood pressure, but no benefit against heart attacks and strokes. Once people exceeded 5 grams a day, they were at much higher risk of cardiovascular complications.
In a large French study, vaccines against COVID-19 were more than 90% effective at preventing severe disease and hospitalization. The researchers compared outcomes for 11.3 million French people over 50 who got vaccinated to the same number without vaccinations. The study ran from late December 2020 to late July 2021 and covered Pfizer-BioNTech, Moderna, and Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccines. Vaccinated people over 75 were 84% less likely to have serious illness or die than their unvaccinated peers. For those between 50 and 74, the efficacy rate was 92%. The researchers did not include asymptomatic or very mild infections in their calculations. The scientists conclude this means that vaccinated people are 9 times less likely to be hospitalized or to die from COVID-19 than unvaccinated people.
Are nuts and seeds heart healthy? A new meta-analysis of 41 prospective cohort studies, including nearly 1.2 million people for up to 32 years, says yes. Nuts and seeds are rich in a compound called alpha-linolenic acid, or ALA. People who consumed the most alpha-linolenic acid were about 10% less likely to die during the studies.
Mushroom lovers appear to have a lower risk of developing depression and other mental illness. Penn State scientists evaluated data collected between 2005 and 2016 on 24,000 American adults. They used detailed dietary records and information on the participants' mental health status. The analysis revealed that people who ate mushrooms frequently were less likely to be diagnosed with depression. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. How do you determine what's true and what's questionable when it comes to medical research? COVID has unleashed tremendous controversies about viral infections, vaccines, and a variety of treatments. Many people are torn between what their doctors say and what they see on television or read on social media.
To learn more about making medical decisions wisely, we are talking today with Dr. Talia Miron-Schatz. She is professor of business at Ono Academic College in Israel, senior fellow at the Center for Medicine in the Public Interest in New York, and a visiting researcher at the Winton Center for Risk and Evidence Communication at the University of Cambridge. She is CEO of Cure My Way, an international health consulting firm, and author of Your Life Depends on It, What You Can Do to Make Better Choices About Your Health.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Talia Miron-Schatz.
It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Dr. Miron-Schatz, could you tell us a bit about your diagnosis of scoliosis as a child and how that's shaped your career?
Well, it's even funny to hear you say diagnosis of scoliosis. It's such a tongue twister. And I think that's so typical of me just being a kid and being told, you have scoliosis. What the heck is scoliosis? Not really understanding that. And, it happened a while ago. So I was more of an object than I was an active patient in my care. I mean, I was basically a kid. I was around age 12 or 13. I didn't know anything. Nobody told me anything. And I just had a lot of scary thoughts going around in my mind about what does this mean? Will I be able to have kids? Will I have to have surgery? What's going on here? I never asked these questions at all because there was just no room to ask them. Nobody asked me, how do you feel? Or do you have any questions? It seems like an obvious thing to ask. So that was a long time ago, and I thought I put it behind me. But then as a PhD student, I was invited to teach genetic counseling students. So I learned everything about medical decision-making, and I said, I want to sit in on a consultation. What does it look like? I'd had kids by then, but I never had genetic counseling. So I sat in an office with a wonderful counselor. She was like the opposite of the doctor I'd had because she was all about giving information, being compassionate and being patient and explaining. And there was a couple there listening to the information, and there was so much of it. There really was. I mean, there were things like genes and chromosomes, and it sounds very trivial. It's like, yeah, of course I know what this is. But do you really, when it applies to you, when it applies to your pregnancy, it becomes much more frightening. It's daunting. What does it all mean exactly? And you're sitting there and you're scared. So they had their consultation. And when they left, I saw them close the door and I thought, oh my God, how much of the information they just received will stay in this room? How much will they take with them? And I realized in a way, they were quite similar to me when I was a lot younger. they were not treated the same way, but they were finding it very difficult to deal with medical information. That was like a light bulb moment for me when I thought, this is really important. This is something where I could and probably should try to help.
Absolutely. And as an anthropologist, where my mind goes is, did you have a chance to follow up with that couple and find out how much of the information they had been given actually went with them or it stayed with them after a week, after a month, after a year? I assume that your research protocol didn't cover that.
It did not. No, I tried to be a fly on the wall the best I could. They didn't even mind me. I mean, they were dealing with so much that they didn't even mind me. But I did follow up with other people. And what I love doing actually is following up with doctors about their experiences as patients, and that they are not dissimilar to what these patients experienced. I mean, many times, obviously, the doctors understand better, but the basis of doctor-patient relationship or encounter is the relationship. It's just feeling that someone is talking to you, feeling that someone cares about you, views you as a person, tries to understand what you're talking about, what you mean, what you understand. And oftentimes this is missing. This is missing even from the experience of people who, presumably should have been the most empowered patients.
What I found fascinating is that when a doctor becomes a patient, perhaps after a diagnosis of cancer or something other pretty serious, it often changes their relationship to their patients once they've recovered.
I think it's very true. I mean, I'm a psychologist. I'm not the anthropologist in the mix right here. But what I've seen is that patients as doctors as patients, the ones I've met, the ones whose books I read, they become meek, if you will, when they're a patient. They're scared. They're sitting in the patient's seat. They're in pain. They don't know what's going on. They're anxious. In a way, it makes them smaller. In a way, they are no longer the gods they used to be, if they are the god doctor type of doctor. And I think it brings in an understanding or a reckoning that to be a person who is a patient is different than to be a person who is anything else. And it almost doesn't matter who you are. I wrote about it. It was funny and tragic. Even going to that first session with a genetic counselor, I parked the car and I was trying to get there on time. There's always traffic. There's never parking. You try to find the office. You don't know where it is. You see radiation, danger signs. And by the time you get to the room, you're not as important as you used to be when you got into your car in the morning.
And you weren't even the patient.
I wasn't, no. That's true.
Now,
yeah.
I think you've pointed out that, the old paradigm was doctor knows best. And the patient is supposed to consult the doctor and the doctor goes, and says, well, what you need is X, Y, Z, or let me prescribe A, B, C. And the patient is supposed to follow along without question, without making any mistakes. How practical is that? And really, is our paradigm changing?
I think it's vastly changing for a number of reasons, some of which are related to medicine, such as the fact that so much medical information is now available. You mentioned my scoliosis. Where could I look for it? There was no Google when I was a little girl with scoliosis. Now things are very, very different. So there's somewhat of a paradigm shift in terms of knowledge and in terms of power. There's also a legal issue where I think doctors are more weary of legal repercussions. So they don't want to tell you, you should do A, B, or C. They say, here are your options. So on one hand, it's fantastic. It's empowering. It gives you the power, the ability. It allows you, I just said patients sometimes feel very meek, and allow is a weird word when it comes to adults, but it does allow you to take on an active role. when speaking about your health. And that's great because you have your preferences. Maybe you are a runner and you hurt your knee and you could have knee surgery. But you can also ask about alternatives because you think you would go crazy without physical activity. So you're wondering, is there anything else I can do, doctor? You just recommended knee surgery. Is there an alternative? And I always recommend that people ask, I call this set of questions, ask about what matters. What are the risks? What are the benefits? What are the alternatives? And you have room for that now. And the doctor actually listens, or at least is supposed to listen. And when you ask about the alternatives, they're supposed to give you the alternatives. And you can say, well, me, Terry, I'm a runner, or maybe you're not a runner. Maybe you're a yogi, whatever you are, or maybe you're a couch potato. So depending on that, you will say, give me the surgery, because I would never go with physical rehabilitation, or don't operate on me because I do not want to sit in a chair for 6 weeks. So it's really wonderful that we get to choose. But that was on one hand. Seeing as we are overwhelmed, seeing as, with all due respect to our internet research, we really are not the experts in the subject matter. Sometimes what patients want is for the doctor to decide for them. And in fact, that's really a fascinating issue, because I did a lot of work and I have a lot of wonderful colleagues from a train of thought that's called shared decision making that really supports having patients receive a role in their care and partake in the decision making process. And I got the most amazing comment. It was like a slap on the wrist from Harvey Feinberg, who was then the head of the Institute of Medicine. And he said, if you really want to empower patients or to have them participate in their care, give them all the options, including the option to tell the doctor, doctor, I don't know what to do. Could you make this decision for me based on your knowledge? And I know it's not a very popular stand in this day and age, but it happens. People sometimes want that. They want to take a back seat. And there's a wonderful YouTube video, a TED Talk by Baba Shiv, who's a marketing professor in Stanford. Okay, the guy should be able to make any decision in the world. And he talks very candidly about his wife's breast cancer. He says, we decided to take a back seat. We were not making decisions. We were not becoming experts. We were just going to trust the doctors. And, and I can't even say I respect that. Of course, who am I to respect that or not respect that? We should respect everything that patients do, because it's their life, it's their body, and it's their health. And it's entirely up to them.
You're listening to Dr. Talia Miron-Schatz. She's Senior Fellow at the Center for Medicine in the Public Interest in New York and a visiting researcher at the Winton Center for Risk and Evidence Communication at the University of Cambridge. She's CEO of Cure My Way, an international health consulting firm, and author of Your Life Depends on It, What You Can Do to Make Better Choices About Your Health.
After the break, learn more about shared decision-making.
The COVID controversies have revealed a lack of trust in doctors and other medical authorities.
How can we weigh benefits and risks of medical interventions?
When people don't feel well informed about risk, it's understandable that they might not be ready to embrace it.
Dr. Miron-Schatz explains the difference between relative and absolute risk.
Why is it important to be perceived as an individual rather than an example of a health condition?
What does shared decision-making mean for patients?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
This podcast is made possible in part by CocoVia, maker of high-potency cocoflavanol supplements. Cocoflavanols are among the most well-studied plant-based nutrients, backed by 20 years of scientific research.
CocoVia Cardio Health is available in capsules or powder, providing 500 milligrams of cocoflavanols daily. This supports better blood flow and vascular performance.
CocoVia also offers Memory Plus, supplements with 750 milligrams of cocoflavanols. This product is backed by 4 different clinical studies demonstrating significant improvement in several aspects of memory.
CocoVia flavanols are derived from real cocoa beans. They offer you all the benefits of chocolate without the sugar. More information at cocovia.com.
Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Kaya Biotics, organic probiotic products developed in Germany and made in the USA. KAYA Biotics.com.
Also by CocoVia, now offering its Cardio Health Powder with 500 milligrams of cocoa flavanols. More information at cocovia.com.
Many health professionals have recommended COVID vaccine shots to their patients, but there's substantial pushback. This has created distrust on both sides of the stethoscope. When we have to make a decision about our health, how do we weigh the benefits against the risks? There's a lot of talk about shared decision-making, but how can we level the playing field when there's such an imbalance in knowledge and power?
We're talking with Dr. Talia Miron-Schatz. She's professor of business at Ono Academic College in Israel and a visiting researcher at the Winton Center for Risk and Evidence Communication at the University of Cambridge. Her book is Your Life Depends on It, What You Can Do to Make Better Choices About Your Health.
Dr. Miron-Schatz, we've been talking about shared decision-making, and that's something we have long been advocating for, for 40 years or more. But the pendulum may have swung a little too far. And the reason I say that is because the COVID controversies have really dominated the news. So, people really do feel that they know better than the doctors sometimes. No, I'm not going to get a vaccine. I want ivermectin. No, I want hydroxychloroquine. I don't trust you, doctor. I don't trust, physicians who say there's this real thing called COVID. And I'm kind of curious how you've noticed differences in decision-making both in the U.S. and in Israel when it comes to vaccination in particular, but COVID-19 in general.
Oh, yeah. So in Israel, it's a lot less political. There, I wrote a column, I called it Get Your Politics Out of My Pandemic. And if only we could do that, I think we would be so much healthier. So I want to talk about a few things that I think lead to this. In behavioral economics, we talk about two ways of thinking. We have system one and system two. And system one is fast, it's quick and dirty, and it's great when you're choosing a sandwich. You're like, I like that. If I ask you why, you're going to say, I don't know, I'm just hungry, I'm going to get this one. And that's it. That's wonderful when you're choosing a sandwich. When you're choosing your medical care, however, please don't choose system one. Use system two. It's slow, it's elaborate, it's data-based. But that's difficult. That's hard. And sometimes it's based on information we don't understand. So people go with system one and they say things like, this is healthy, or I eat organic, I don't need vaccinations, or I want this or that because I read about it in the news. And if you ask them and you try to reason with them, probably they will not be able to tell you a lot more than that. And that's incredibly sad. It's a shame because if they don't believe there's COVID, they should look at the numbers. Over 700,000 Americans died of COVID. It's very real and very tragic. You've said a word that is at the basis of everything, and that is trust. So if you're my doctor, forget COVID. You're my doctor. You tell me, Talia, you have atrial fibrillation. You need to take this. I'm like, my doctor is saying this weird word. What's he talking about? I don't know. I don't like this doctor. I'm just going to ignore it because I don't trust. And if I don't trust, I have no reason to follow up. Right now, we're looking at huge mistrust of the FDA, of the political system, of pharma, of pretty much everyone. And I think it's ironic because even if you want to do alternative medicine, you should be very thankful that you have doctors, you have real MDs who will treat you. And even if you don't think COVID is a thing, don't want to vaccinate, if you get sick, where are you going to go? Let me guess, the hospital, where you want to be treated by a doctor, maybe put on a ventilator. It's not the organic thing to do, but it can save your life. So I think there's a lot of slogans that people are throwing around and don't necessarily help them. So I have two more things to say from my perspective as a behavioral economist. One of them is going to sound strange, but we look at biases. We look at the way people view things that they do versus things that they don't do. And we tend to think, and that's idiotic, and I'm saying it's idiotic because I do the same thing as well, that if you neglect to do something, that's kind of okay because you didn't really do it. You sort of defaulted into not doing it. You weren't paying attention. You're not really responsible. Whereas if you take action, then you are responsible. So it's like omission biases. I neglected to do this versus commission bias. I did it, therefore I'm responsible. I think with COVID, going to vaccinate is something you do actively. So there's the commission bias, and people are afraid. They're saying, oh, there's side effects. But if you are afraid of vaccinating and you think you are putting upon yourself this enormous risk, then you don't want to do that. And that's the commission bias. And you avoid that. Given that, we sort of gave up with behavioral economics. We gave up with nudges and with information. And if you look at what the state of New York is now doing, they have vaccine mandates. They told healthcare workers, you have got to vaccinate, period, or you can't work here anymore.
And most of them did.
Kicking and screaming, but they did. Exactly. When push comes to shove, you say, you know what, I don't want to lose my job. And this thing that I don't want to do can actually save my life or help prevent me getting very sick, and definitely help me from prevent me from getting other people sick. And who wants to do that, right? So it didn't take persuasion. It took some, I don't want to say brutal force, but almost. It took very powerful means of saying, do this or else. And you know what? If you're very, very anti-vaccinating, you would probably rather lose your job than vaccinate. And that's your prerogative.
Yes, a few people did that too. I do have a question, Dr. Marin-Schatz. Mm-hmm. We started this conversation talking about benefits and risks and how we have to weigh the benefits of doing something or not doing something against the risks. But how do we learn what the pros and cons might be? I think part of the problem with vaccine hesitancy has been that people don't feel they really have been well informed about the potential risks of the vaccine. They feel that there's a giant secret box that has all these risks in it that some experts might know about, but they're not talking about.
I almost want to say I wish there was such a secret box. I think if you open the box, you'll find one word in it, and that's uncertainty. And that's what we're dealing with. I mean, we want to have a vaccine that's been tested for 10, 15 years. What are the long-term effects? People ask. I don't know. But let me tell you the long-term effects of COVID. They ain't great. People are going to die. Businesses are going to shut down. Who knows what's going to happen to the economy?
And there's long COVID.
So yeah, it's not a fun disease. Yes, let's avoid that. So there's a lot of uncertainty. Life is full of uncertainty. I mean, you get out of the house in the morning, you could get run over by a bus. We ignore that. We usually just ignore that, or we would go crazy. We would not be able to tolerate that. But medicine really is an act of uncertainty. And COVID it has thrown so many issues in our face. And one of them is uncertainty connected with trust, being able to say, no, I don't know what the long-term effects of this are, but I trust the FDA. I read the data from Pfizer if I could, or any other vaccine manufacturer. I look at the numbers of people who have been sick with or without vaccinations, and the differences are staggering. And I'm going to take a leap and vaccinate.
Well, when we talk about trust, usually it's based on interpersonal relationships. So you want to see a doctor, you want to trust the doctor that you see, and most people do if they have a primary care physician or a primary care provider, perhaps a physician's assistant or a nurse practitioner. This is a person they trust. Does that matter when it comes to making a health decision? There's a question that patients may ask, which is, what would you recommend, doctor, if this were your mother or your brother who had what I have?
I think it matters immensely. I think without trust, there's nothing. I think even with digital health, you have to have a level of trust and you have to have a level of familiarity and of relationship. Even I consulted a digital health company once that they developed a payment model. A payment, it's like, who needs a relationship there? But because they didn't fully explain what they were doing and who they were connected to, and then they were asking you for your credit card info, I told them, this is not going to work. You have got to build some sort of a relationship. Even, it's a minuscule relationship. Obviously, you don't really have a relationship with someone who pays for your medical insurance, but in fact, you sort of do, because you want it to be trustworthy and you want to know that you're giving your credit card info to someone who's not scamming you and that it will work when you go to the doctor's office. So that's where probably we are the most remote, we're the most distant from whoever we're trusting, but we still need to trust them. When we go to our doctor, it matters so much. If the doctor says, "Hi, Terry, how are you?" and you know them and they care about you and they know that you like A, B, and C, and they have a taste for your preferences. They understand who you are and where you're coming from. I've been seeing the same GP for a long time, as has my mother. And I remember maybe 15 years ago, I said, "My mom doesn't have a lot of energy." He looked at me and he said, "Compared to you or compared to her?" I was like, okay, I got it. But he couldn't say that if he didn't know me. And that was very meaningful. But I also think that to ask the doctor, what would you do if this was your mother? I understand where it's coming from, but his mother and your mother might be very different people. So it might not be the best advice. Although it does say, I need your empathy. I need to know that you care. I need to know that you could also be in my shoes, and they're very uncomfortable shoes.
Well, on the People's Pharmacy, we talk a lot about the difference between absolute risk and relative risk. And so, journalists love relative risk. Reduces your risk of heart attack by 38%. And most people go, wow, that's great. Sign me up for that drug. But when you look at the absolute risk reduction, it may actually be you go from 3% to 2%. So it's an actual 1% out of 100 people will get the benefit. And so people have a really hard time understanding risks as they have a hard time understanding benefits. How can we improve people's health literacy so they actually can understand the benefit-risk ratio?
That's such a trick question, because I think what we need to improve is the way that risk is presented to people. So, for example, the example you gave is fantastic. It reduces your risk by 38%, sign me up. But if they said, Joe, for guys your age, out of 100 people, one will have a heart attack, God forbid. And if you take this drug, it will only happen to, instead of 1 out of 100, 0.8 out of 100. You'd be like, what? Are you kidding me? That's a small risk to begin with, and you're only reducing it by a small proportion. I'm not interested. And that is a very clear way of presenting information. It's called frequentist presentation. It sounds like a big word, but actually, if you think about it, it's something that's very primitive. Even if you're a kid, not that kids are primitive, but really they don't have to be great at math. But you can say, go there and in 100 out of 100 people, one will be whatever. That's so much more intuitive than 1%. And when we're talking about larger numbers and small percentages where everyone gets a headache. And, one of the stories that I read, and I love that, is I gave this talk at a presidential symposium filled with doctors and psychologists and people were very smart, and I gave them an example with percentages, with probabilities. They were scratching their heads. They were making the most ridiculous mistakes. And I love that. I love that because, no, really, it's easy to say, well, people, just ordinary people don't understand. No, nobody understands. Our minds are not geared to understand probabilities. I want to say something else, and it's related to COVID. So I get interviewed on TV a lot, and some interviewers are very panicky, and they say the numbers are rising, and it's like, oh my God, we're all going to die. Yeah, we are actually all going to die one day, but let's hope not of COVID. As the numbers are rising, let's say, let's look at the numbers. They're not that big. We used to be scared of an X number. We are maybe 10th of that. That's fine. It's not the end of the world. There is a 2% increase. Okay, things fluctuate. So yes, when we talk about relative risk, it's just a way of saying something with percentages that you don't always know what the denominator is. And that could actually hurt us.
And percentages and probability are not something that we've done a great job teaching people. There are so many other places that knowledge could be useful in addition to health, and yet we often don't put it to practice.
Dr. Miron-Schatz, you've mentioned the term shared decision-making, something that we truly believe in. But what does it mean? How do you level the playing field so that both the patient and the patient's family and the health professional are somewhat equal or balanced so that it really can be a shared decision?
Well, the fact that it took you so long to ask the question only shows how complex this is. I think it starts with information. It starts with information, with really being able to convey to the patient what it is that's happening, what this condition means, what it could look like in the future. There's a lot of information that the doctor has and the patient doesn't. And, we started this conversation with this word, with diagnosis, and it's scary what's going to happen. And that's a prognosis. To the degree that the patient and their family know that and really understand that, know what's going on and what could be happening and what the alternatives are, then you have somewhat leveled the playing field. So that's shared decision making. And I write about that a lot because I think there are a lot of good intentions with shared decision making, but to implement it is truly hard. To get to that place where you and I are sitting, and if you're my doctor, then I don't look up to you saying, you know everything and I know absolutely nothing, but I do sort of know something, then we can start talking. And then I don't have to ask you, I don't have to be helpless when I ask you for your advice. But to get there is truly hard. By the way, it's on you, it's on your doctor, and it's on your healthcare system. And that's something which I didn't think I would be touching upon, but it's crucial because your doctor needs to help you and they need to get help in helping you understand what is going on with your health.
You're listening to Dr. Talia Miron-Schatz. She's a professor of business at Ono Academic College in Israel, senior fellow at the Center for Medicine in the Public Interest in New York. She's author of Your Life Depends on It, What You Can Do to Make Better Choices About Your Health.
After the break, we'll be talking about health literacy.
How can we get accurate health information we can understand?
Truly motivated patient can sometimes develop a great deal of expertise in their own condition. That changes the process of shared decision-making.
TV commercials for prescription drugs are supposed to inform us about risks as well as benefits, but they are designed to sell product.
How can we make medical decisions more thoughtfully?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
This podcast is brought to you in part by Kaya Biotics, organic probiotic supplements. These supplements are made in the USA with high-quality, sustainably sourced ingredients.
Originally developed in Germany, Kaya Biotics offers 3 different formulations with 15 carefully selected strains of bacteria. These are designed to increase the diversity of your gut flora and support your immune system. More information at kayabiotics.com. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by CocoVia, now offering its Cardio Health Powder with 500 milligrams of cocoflavanols. More information at cocovia.com.
And by Kyabiotics, micro-encapsulated organic hypoallergenic probiotic products developed in Germany and made in the USA. KAYABiotics.com.
When you have an important medical decision to make, where do you turn for accurate information? Dr. Google provides so much conflicting data, it can be hard to sort out what makes sense and what is just gossip, rumor, or innuendo.
Our guest today is Dr. Talia Miron-Schatz. She is Senior Fellow at the Center for Medicine and the Public Interest in New York and a visiting researcher at the Winton Center for Risk and Evidence Communication at the University of Cambridge. She is author of Your Life Depends on It, What You Can Do to Make Better Choices About Your Health.
Dr. Miron-Schatz, in your wonderful book, Your Life Depends on It, you write about health literacy. And I'd like to ask, what is health literacy and how can we get accurate information that we understand?
It's a wonderful question. You know, you asked a two-part question. How can we get accurate information that we understand? That's not easy, Terry. You know, I looked at things that I found on Wikipedia. You could say, well, that's like trivial. Not trivial. I looked at breast implants. I thought this is kind of something that everyone understands. But then they start throwing in a lot of technical information and a lot of complicated words. And in fact, something that some health systems do is they tailor their materials to a fifth grader. That's something that I've been working on and talking about and writing about and consulting about for a very long time. Why? You could say, why? Aren't you insulting your patients? I mean, they're not fifth graders. Why are you doing that? The official answer would be that there are 90 million Americans with low health literacy. And what this means, what health literacy means, is interesting. It's not just like literacy. It's not just the ability to read health information. It's the ability to read it, to understand it, to seek it if you don't have it, to be active about it, and to be critical about it. And now, be critical about it is also a social component. So you could say, well, who am I to be critical? You know, who am I? Like, I'm only whatever. Whoever you are, you could say, I'm only whatever. I don't have medical training, or I do have medical training, but I don't specialize in. So it's not just, if you could say, just about 90 million Americans, people who have low health literacy, but it's really many of us who encounter medical information, need to make choices, and are just overwhelmed and find it difficult. So it's great to address this as fifth graders, because this ensures that when we go home and talk about it with our best friends or our significant others or our moms, we will convey the information accurately. And then we can dig deeper if we want, all the way to the New England Journal of Medicine article.
Well, I'd like to share a quick story with you. We had an opportunity to meet Dr. Richard Rockefeller. He was a wonderful family practice physician in Maine, and he developed a form of leukemia. And he said, at the time, I knew very little about this unusual form of leukemia and its treatment. And as I became very interested because of personal reasons, I started to dig. And I dug deeper and deeper and deeper and learned about a new drug called Gleevec that would work for my particular kind of leukemia. And he said, you know, my oncologist, by the end of this, knew a lot less than I did. And guess what? The patient support group that I'm a part of, they actually probably knew more than most of the oncologists who would deal with them. And so it's the idea of digging deeper because you have a vested interest. It's your health. And people can oftentimes, they don't have to be a doctor in order to learn about their particular situation, whether it's scoliosis or a rare kind of leukemia.
That's very true. But remember, the person you're describing is a doctor. I actually got to work on Gleevec at some point. That's funny. But so obviously, when you have a condition and you have the ability to dig deeper, that's wonderful. really, I mean, it would be more wonderful if you didn't have the condition. But assuming you do and you have the information, you can really help yourself tremendously and help your doctor help you. Something that you said earlier on, or Terry said, that was accurate information. So when you look at accurate information and you don't listen to the advice of the lady who washes my hair at the hairdressers, who says cancer is afraid of lemon. Like, what? Let's hope she never has cancer. So if you go to credible resources, you can definitely do a wonderful job of digging deeper and coming to your doctor. And then your doctor has to be ready to listen to what you have to say, which, funny enough, is another form of health literacy, because they also have to have the openness to listen to new information.
We've been talking about information presented to people. What we haven't talked about is one of the big mediums that information is presented, and that is television. Mm-hmm. And one of our pet peeves is the television commercial for whatever expensive prescription drug you choose that's being advertised now. There is information in that commercial. There's information about the benefits, of course, that's the focus. There is information about the risks. FDA requires that. But we think these commercials are so constructed as to minimize the information about the risks. What do you think?
I think you're spot on. You're absolutely right, Terry. Obviously, when they show a commercial about medication, they have to talk about the side effects. What do? Because side effects don't sell, right? Who wants to buy something that? So what they do is they play the side effects with a very nice and soothing tone. This medication could kill you, but here are some beautiful flowers to look at.
Exactly right. Or someone is smiling.
Exactly. And that's very distracting. So basically, your mind now has to process two conflicting things. And it's much easier to process a picture. So you're looking at a field or something and you're listening to blah, 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 blah. Actually, there's pretty terrible things that could happen to you, but you're processing it as blah, blah, blah. It's borderline illegal. That's the truth. It doesn't cross the border in many ways because advertisers are sophisticated, but it is borderline illegal. And to be honest, it's unfair. It really is.
I do have a question for you, Dr. Miriam Schatz. I would like to have my doctor look at me, as you described, as an individual person who may have a condition rather than as an exemplar of that condition. Why is that important?
I love that you asked that. I think the answer is because you are a person. You are not a condition. You are a person. And, I could give you evolutionary reasons for why connection matters, but I think we all feel that. You want the doctor to look at you, to say, "Hi, Terry, how are you?" As in you are a person. And people actually feel that at a very deep level. I mean, it shocked me to read about various conditions like HIV, diabetes, etc., where if the patient doesn't feel that their doctor cares about them as a person, they don't really follow up on the treatment. And it drove me crazy because who are you punishing? You're punishing yourself. You are not getting the treatment you need. You are hurting yourself, not your doctor, even if your doctor is a jerk. What's going on here? And I looked at it. I thought maybe it comes from a very deep relationship we have with our physicians, almost a parental relationship. You want your parent to care about you. And when they don't care about you, you think maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I don't deserve to feel good. That was the explanation I found I came up with. I mean, obviously based on clinical psychology, because it really blew my mind. But I think what it says is, as people, we really want to be treated as such. Yes.
Let me give you an example with my mom. She had high blood pressure. She felt great when her systolic blood pressure was around 150 and her diastolic was over 90. If she got down to 120 over 80, she felt terrible. And her doctor, her family practice doctor, wanted her to take the medicine, and she tried taking it in the dose that he recommended, and her kidney her kidney levels, the numbers were not looking so good. So he sent her to a an expert in kidney disease and an expert in hypertension. And this doctor basically said to my mom, I know that the guidelines say 120/80, but you're going to get dizzy if I do that. And you could fall and you could end up in real trouble. It's okay if your blood pressure is a little higher, as long as it doesn't get out of control. Now, my mom lived to the age of 92, and she never had a heart attack and she never had a stroke. And she really appreciated that expert who didn't treat her as if she was, some sort of number that had to flow from some kind of guideline that was on some kind of a computer checklist. He treated her as a person, and she really appreciated that.
I'm sure she did. I think he not only treated her as a person, but he also really reviewed her chart. He really saw that she probably had this, what is called high blood pressure for a while, and that it wasn't negatively affecting her. And when it was low, when it was normal, it was actually negatively affecting her. So he actually looked at the data and reviewed it and wasn't just being lazy and saying, here are the guidelines. I don't care what you're telling me. I'm not interested in your experience. And in fact, he should be interested in her experience. We are very different from one another. Obviously, there are guidelines, but we are not all the same.
We understand you might have a story about your daughter and her Zumba disease. Could you tell us about that, please?
Oh, my God. So I have 3 children and I love them. They're not kids anymore. They're still my children. They can't help that. When my baby was 21, she started going to Zumba, and it was great, except she would come home and she would complain about a numbness in her left side, her hand and her leg. And that was pretty scary. I made fun of it. I called it, oh, you have the Zumba disease. But that was really me being stupid because I was scared. Like I didn't know what was going on. And she was scared. So one day, she was over 21. She got a bit drunk. She came back home and she was saying, I can't feel my arm. I don't want to be paralyzed. So basically, we realized how scared she was and that it was not only happening with Zumba. She did some neurology testing. Nothing came up. And I went with her to the neurologist after she had had some tests and there were no findings. And he asked her, how are you doing? She said, I read on the internet. that was all she could say. He was not interested in listening. I just said health literacy is looking for information on the patient side and on the doctor's side, and he was not listening. Twice he asked something, twice she started with the internet, and he said, it's either me or the internet. Okay, but eventually he said something and she had an opening and she said, you're not listening. I looked and I found that this numbness in the limbs could be associated with gluten. And I tested it and I went off gluten for a month and I've been feeling a lot better and I don't have the numbness anymore. And that was fantastic. And I was very proud of her because like you said, Joe, about Dr. Rockefeller, she did her own research. She was very invested in it. It had occurred to her, I don't even know how, and she found out. And the doctor didn't listen. He didn't trust her with that. That was astonishing. He said, how could that be? It's metabolic. How could it only affect one side? And his solution was really embarrassing for him. He said, I don't know. I'll send you to an MRI. I don't think we'll find anything. And well, maybe it's psychological, which is such a cop-out. I mean, what is psychological? Do you will yourself to have numbness in your limbs? So that really was an eye-opener. I mean, there we were sitting, it was 2019. The internet has been around for a while. He never thought to say, you know what, let me check. Because when I went back home, I Googled. And really, you have Google Scholar. It's not that difficult. You say gluten and limb numbness. I found a paper. It was an Italian paper. It was in gastroenterology. Obviously, a neurologist doesn't read that, but they have to be open-minded as well. And, like you so eloquently said, patients can become experts in their care. They can actually help doctors because doctors don't have all the time in the world to understand and to read everything. And if a patient comes with information, I think oftentimes the automatic response of a doctor is to roll their eyes. Oh my God, here comes another one who thinks they're so much better than me. But maybe they have a point. Maybe they are bringing something to the table. I was very proud of my daughter, and I was sitting there. I told this to my editor, and I think he thought I was a terrible mother because I was just sitting there. I didn't say a word. I didn't say, excuse me, I'm a psychology professor. I study medical decision making, blah, blah, blah. And because I thought, this is my daughter. She's 21. She's an adult. She's handling this herself. We're not going to educate her neurologist. He's not going to change probably, but she learned something. She stood up to him, and she knows with her own body that she was right. So thank God we don't have the Zumba disease anymore. And the house became gluten-free.
Dr. Miriam Schatz, what advice do you have for us as to how we can make medical and health choices more thoughtfully?
Read all you can about it. Practice. Understand what happens to you when you sit in the doctor's office. Don't think about it as a sick person's thing to do that you never want to do. Think about it as, hey, I'm an empowered person and I want to understand this. It's never going to apply to me. I'm never going to be sick, but I want to understand this. And this is the best way to approach it because we avoid thinking about disease like the plague. So just think about it as, I'm cool. I'm going to learn all about behavioral economics and health because that's the cool thing to do. That's the empowering thing to do. And I hope you'll never need it, but if you need it, it's going to be there for you.
Dr. Talia Miriam Schatz, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Terry and Joe.
You've been listening to Dr. Talia Miriam Schatz. She's a professor of business at Ono Academic College in Israel, senior fellow at the Center for Medicine in the Public Interest in New York, and a visiting researcher at the Winton Center for Risk and Evidence Communication at the University of Cambridge. She's CEO of Cure My Way, an international health consulting firm, and author of Your Life Depends on It: What You Can Do to Make Better Choices About Your Health.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits our interviews. The inimitable B.J. Liederman composed our theme music.
This show is a co-production of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC, with the People's Pharmacy.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Verizana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome. Online at VERISANA.com.
And by CocoVia, the maker of high-potency cocoflavanol supplements that support cognitive and cardiovascular health. More information at cocovia.com.
And by Kaya Biotics, microencapsulated, organic, hypoallergenic probiotic products developed in Germany and made in the USA. KAYABiotics.com.
Today's show is number 1276. You can find it online at peoplespharmacy.com. You could subscribe to our podcast through your favorite podcast provider. We post the show on our website on Monday morning.
If you'd like to make a comment about this show, look for the post on our website, peoplespharmacy.com. Again, it's show number 1276.
At our website, you can sign up for our free online newsletter and get the latest news about COVID-19 and other important health stories. By subscribing to our newsletter, you also get regular access to our weekly podcast and find out ahead of time which topics we'll be covering.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thanks for listening. Please join us again next week. Thank you for listening to the People's Pharmacy Podcast. It's an honor and a pleasure to bring you our award-winning program week in and week out. But producing and distributing this show as a free podcast takes time and costs money.
If you like what we do and you'd like to help us continue to produce high-quality, independent healthcare journalism, please consider chipping in.
All you have to do is go to peoplespharmacy.com/donate.
Whether it's just one time or a monthly donation, you can be part of the team that makes this show possible. Thank you for your continued loyalty and support. We couldn't make our show without you.